Perfect. So everyone, I'm very pleased to have with us today, Deborah Shukyn-Plageman. So Deborah is the CEO and founder of PersonaGrata Consulting. She is a PhD candidate in coaching psychology and holds a Master of Education in Adult Education with specializations in transformative and distance education. She is a professional certified coach through the International Coach Federation and a certified career development practitioner through the Career Development Practitioners Certification Board of Ontario. So we're very excited to have her on board with us today for our career exploration after cancer talk. And Deborah, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. That certainly was a lot of words for an introduction. And so whenever I meet a new group of people, as we are today, I like to just take a moment to think about what might be important to you to know about me other than all the words. And so one of the things that I think might be important for you to know is that all of those words, what they represented is this, is that I am self-employed. I have a beautiful relationship with Wellspring, and I do some work and some volunteer work with Wellspring. But being self-employed over the last 2 years, as well as being a PhD candidate, has meant that I have had to dip my toes in and out of the world of work in various ways and to readjust in various ways. So, and I hope that, other than the fact that I do this for a living, that my lived experience in career exploration over the last couple of years can somehow benefit the conversation today. So this is not hugely interactive because we're in a webinar type situation. So I do want to ask if you would just pop into the chat box. We'll do like a little 2-word check-in for starters. So yeah, if you want to just put 2 words that kind of represent what you're thinking about today and how you're feeling today. And I'll just pop my 2 words in and I'll say spring walk. Those are my 2 words for the day. I'm very excited about that. So I see that people are starting to put in the chat. There are a couple of words. Exhausted with the snow, new beginnings, return to work anxiety, worried, excited, looking forward, curious, excited. Nice to hear we have some excitement, wanting change, absolutely. Energized and curious. And so you can see that we have, a host of different feelings that are present in the room today. And I welcome all of those. Stressed and scared, absolutely. All of those things are possible. All of those things are welcome. So yeah, so thank you for just jumping right in at the get-go. Here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about this thing called a VUCA world that we live in. It's kind of a funny acronym. Well, we are going to talk about change. So a couple of you mentioned nervous about change and so on in your introduction. Then we're really going to talk about what I would call the job market, the labor market, or the world of work. How do you know it? How do you know the processes involved? How do you know yourself in all of that? What does your package look like? And then just managing all of that. And hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. Yeah, so again, let's go into the chat box and just type in your geographic location and maybe some idea of your job or career. So you don't have to say specifically. You could say maybe you're in transition, maybe you're an essential worker, maybe you're somebody who has to go back to the office. And so we'll just kind of get a sense for who's in our virtual room today. So sales leader, Manitoba, Toronto, Calgary, teacher, bless your heart, teacher, Guelph, aquatic biologist, interesting, Nova Scotia, academia, bless your heart. Wow, so we have people from all across the country, partnerships, home care, oh, bless your heart as well. So Waterloo, in transition, academia, Absolutely. And so there are nuances to all of these different jobs or careers. And hopefully we can come together and talk about process and product today. So thank you for your generous introductions. I'm going to start by talking about the times that we're in. So this term VUCA is a term that was coined actually in the military some years ago. And it became much more popular as times have really, the speed of change has really accelerated in the last couple of years. So VUCA stands for, as you can see here, it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I think that we would all agree that we are in some VUCA times. And so what I wanted to say about that, first of all, is that here are some tips right up front about dealing with a VUCA world. So the first one, and the one that I always say when all else fails, there's self-compassion. So meeting that uncertainty with understanding and self-compassion can be very much a part of this return to work journey. Reacting to complexity with clarity. So we're going to talk a little bit about knowing yourself and knowing your message. And then fight ambiguity, which is the constant cycle of change that we're in, with this idea of agility. And that is being a little bit more able to ride the winds of change. And so the quote that I bring forward here says, and this is from Mandy Hale, it says, trust the wait, embrace the uncertainty, enjoy the beauty of becoming. When nothing is certain, anything is possible. And so again, just allowing yourself to be in the process that we're in. I want to take time to walk you through this funny diagram here. And if any of you have taken the Wellspring's Return to Work program, this is one of the processes that we reference in the program. And this is a model put together by William Bridges, and it's his model of change. And I always think about the idea of doing and being. So what William Bridges says is that change is the thing that is external to you. It's the thing that's happening. So that might be your job circumstance has changed, or you're leaving long-term disability and going back into the workforce. Whatever the change is, that is the thing that is happening outside of you. That's the doing thing. Transition, that's the being part of it. So transition is how you react internally to what is happening externally. So William Bridges really differentiates between the being and the doing of change. And if we look at his, a representation anyways, of his model, what you will see here is that you start off all endings. Let me take a step back there. So all beginnings start with an ending. And that's a bit to get your head around. As you saw, I was just tripping over my words there. So at the beginning of your returning to work from the cancer journey is symbolic of the ending of your cancer journey, hopefully, or your cancer treatment in any case. And so he talks about, Bridges talks about 3 phases in the change or transition. And that is starting with the ending over here, the neutral zone, and the new beginning over here. And you can see just very quickly, the square box will say that represents you at the ending. You see it start to change, the situation changes, therefore you're starting to go through a transition, the molecules break apart, They start looking a little less like a square, sort of not like any particular shape. It can become uncomfortable in this neutral zone when you're maybe starting to negotiate your return to work plan, and you're starting to look at what does the labor market, what does the world of work look like 2 years into COVID plus my cancer. And all of this feels kind of uncomfortable. And as you navigate through this internally, as you ask yourself some really key questions and start to begin to accept this new change, you work towards the new beginning. And you see over here on this right side, it's my right side anyways, you see that the molecules start to look again like more like a shape, and then eventually you have a square that has turned into a circle. And William Bridges really talks about this in terms of how do we adjust to these changes. One is, he says, recognize that your responses are part of the normal process, meaning that you may feel some discomfort, you may feel a sense of loss, you may feel some excitement. I often think that sometimes emotions that we would feel maybe are opposite are actually two facets of the same diamond. So you may be a little bit excited about going back into the world of work. You may have liked your job in the past, but you might also feel uncertain of what the workplace looks like. You might feel a little worried about the stress of your job and how that might have contributed to cancer. All of those things, those are perfectly normal concerns. Other things that William Bridges says about this process is to focus on gains, not just what you're losing. So expanding your network, identifying, again, what you can control and what you don't control. One thing that I think is really helpful in this journey of change and transition is accepting that whether or not you are comfortable with it, generally change happens. And so it's really the transition part that is going to be an important part of your journey. So I wanted to take a couple of minutes at the outset to talk about the being and the doing of change. Some of what much of what we're going to talk about from here on in is actually more in the doing of change, as this is just kind of a practical 1 hour overview. So where do we want to start? We want to start by thinking about, so know the market. And the quote that we have here is Abraham Lincoln, and he says, the best way to know your future is to create it. So just looking at the trends in the world of work now and into the future, COVID is a factor. Polarization of views. So you may have people working in the same workplace who have vastly different views on how to be in the workplace now, how to be outside of the workplace. Globalization has been something that has been happening for quite some time, but diversity and inclusion have become at the forefront of so many of our conversations. Other factors that are affecting the market right now, there is this really interesting a couple of phenomenons that I feel may be to your benefit returning to work after the cancer journey. And hear me out on this one. So first of all, there is this thing that they're calling the Great Resignation. And you may not have heard of it in those terms, but what is happening globally is employees who have had a chance to really think about their place in life and where work is in their life and the meaning of work in their life are literally resigning in droves. So companies have many open positions. So what we have in that is we have some opportunity. So if you're going back, maybe there is a vacant position that might interest you more than the one that you're going back to. It might mean that because globally companies are short and behind on the supply chain, People are working some very long hours. But it also means that for the first time in recent history, the tides are changing in the world of work, and they are changing from an employer's market to an employee's market, meaning that you have a little bit more power in the relationship going back to work than you would have 2 years ago. So I tend to think that this is, again, to the positive for folks who are recovering from cancer. What seemed impossible 2 years ago is not only possible, but it is becoming the norm. So if you were an office worker in the past, or even in academia, as many of you are, it was a very small portion of the population who had the luxury to work from home, or even the technology to do that. Those two things have become commonplace, and not going into the office 5 days a week is also now commonplace. And why I feel that this is to your advantage, returning to work or entering the labor market after cancer, is because these things, all of these many different configurations of work are possible, whereas in the past, these would have been an exceptional request, perhaps on an accommodation for returning to work, working from home 1 or 2 days a week, or having a hybrid work situation, or working from a different office some days. But all of those things have now become the norm. And the third thing that I want to say about this work from home and hybrid work, if you are potentially in academia or an office worker, is that the technology is there, the infrastructure is now there. And also because so many companies are in a state of flux of returning, not returning, going back and forth, a lot of attention is being paid right now to the majority of the workforce. So the 90% that can get back to the office 3 days a week. That's where a lot of companies' energy is going right now. So that if you're asking for something that's an exception to the company policy, they may not say yes, but they may allow you to do it anyways because they're concerned with getting the 90% back in the office. So I hope all of that makes sense, and why I feel like in the market, this is probably, if there is a best case scenario in going back to work, a difficult situation, this may well be it. And then the other thing that I think is interesting that's opened up here is the idea of new skills and remote working skills. So there's a whole pile of new applications. I want to be kind of not application specific here, but there are all kinds of workflow technology, web-based technologies that employers are using. There's new communication tools employers are using. Most of us who are office workers right now probably have 2 screens. You may have external cameras, so on. If you're a leader going back to work, there are some new leadership skills that are going to be required that are part of the idea of diversity and inclusion, but they're also part of the idea of hybrid work. So the idea of creating a safe and equitable environment for employees who are in various states of distance and technology is going to become very much leadership skills, very core leadership skills. You are not behind, the whole world is behind. Right now, I'm actually teaching a course on returning to a hybrid work environment and leadership, and the scholarship is so new. And there's lots of new scholarship, and I'll tell you, a lot of it actually is very interesting now. I'm going to move away from the doing, and I'm going to move into the being. So a lot of what we're talking about, remote working leadership skills, have to do with inclusivity, reflexiveness, inclusion, psychological safety, creating a safe environment for people to express their fears, to a safe environment to hold polarized views, and so on. So this is really an interesting opportunity, and you are not behind. So even though you feel like you may be for having missed work for a couple of years, it's certainly in the office environment or the academic environment, we're all just learning. And so again, I tend to think that that's going to go in your favor. I want to back up just in terms of knowing the market. I want to say that on your journey to return to work, if you're still away from work and you wanted to kind of dip your toe in the water, there's all kinds of interesting new learning on these remote working and leadership skills. There is a thing that I'm going to bring forward that I always have fun bringing this forward. It's called a MOOC. And a MOOC is called a massive open online course. And you can find, for example, there's all kinds of platforms, lots of new words, technology platforms that host these MOOCs. And basically it's open free learning from some of the best academic institutions in the world. So those of you who are in academia, I would be very surprised if your own academic institution doesn't have currently a MOOC. Even the U of T has some MOOCs. I'm here in Toronto. So suffice it to say that the learning is there for you if you wanted to learn more about inclusive leadership, if you want, whatever it is you want to learn about, the learning is there. LinkedIn is a spectacular tool for networking as well as learning. And there are also free courses on LinkedIn. Also, you know, platforms that you're more aware of that you probably use in your everyday life, YouTube, lots of great YouTubes. If you haven't had an interview in 10 years and you're going back to the labor market, you might want to Google or YouTube a couple of interview videos. The public libraries are just starting to reopen here in Ontario. Lots of great information. And here in Toronto, our public library actually has what's called an entrepreneur in residence or a career counselor in residence. So whether you're in business for yourself or you're looking for help in the labor market, the Toronto Public Library, free, great information, now open, lots of resources online, lots of free workshops online. So that's a little bit more about the market. I want to talk about the process. So just knowing that during the course of your work life, you may be in various stages of employment, employment entry, re-employment, all of those things, or unemployment. So just know that it's a process. It is not a linear process. So, and it's often cyclical. So gone are the days when we, maybe in academia, but even I think academia less so. Gone are the days when we get one job and that's it for life. So you may, I always like to tell people that the skills that you use to get a job are not always the skills that you need to keep a job or even be on the job. So at one time I was working with folks who were destined to become material handlers or work in shipping and receiving. And being that personable person in the interview doesn't tell me how you're going to operate a forklift. It doesn't tell me whether or not you're going to be able to learn my inventory system. So that just recognize that the skills during the various cycles of employment and reemployment are different. Know how to consider exploring your options. And even if you're going back to the same job, then think about what are the things maybe that you're good at, what are the things you did well before, and what are those things that how you can represent yourself and potentially get more of those things going when you first land back on the job. Know your interests, know your skills, and know your values. And there's all kinds of great free inventories out there, or you can hire a career coach, or you can visit the Wellspring career coaching clinic. So lots of good options there. I mentioned LinkedIn. So you nowadays, you probably need to intentionally build your profile on the web, and it depends what sector you're in. But if you're an office worker, you may need to use LinkedIn. If you're an interior decorator, you're going to probably build your media profile on a platform called House or some other platform. So just know what are the ways that you can represent yourself before you actually walk in the room representing yourself. So if we talk about career management, just looking at the full cycle of things, there's job search. That's how you look for a job. There's interviewing. That's a different set of skills. There's negotiating and acceptance. And even if you're returning to the same job, there's some level of negotiation between your employers and you and insurance companies, so on. All of the parts of the cycle more or less have the same elements. So onboarding if you're a new employee, but if you're a returning employee, there probably is some onboarding as well. It's almost a certainty that technology has changed since you've been away, so there may be some familiarization. There may have even been, almost certainly there's been a reorg. There's some new technology to do with the changes. And then there is on the job and career management. So just know that, and then we're talking about the full cycle. So what is it that you're doing on the job? How are you progressing? How are you keeping in touch with your doctor? And how is your health being represented as part of your return to work journey? And then career management, hopefully, once the illness of cancer is hopefully behind you, then you may have a bright career ahead of you. And so you may be planning on what is next in your career. You may be planning on, many of us are at a later stage in our career when we get cancer. And so you may be planning on how are you going to wind down your career and what is your career legacy. So these are all things to think about in terms of the process. And I want to share with you the quote on the slide says, "It's never too late in life to have a genuine adventure." And I'll share with you that I know this, and I walk this road. I have walked this road until I was 52. I had no post-secondary education whatsoever. At 55, I got a master's degree, and hopefully by age 60, I will have a PhD. It is not too late. So I share that with you from my own journey. In continuing down this road, and I'm looking, there's something in the chat. Thank you, Heather. Thank you for that. Congratulations. It's been, there obviously is much more to the journey. So I want to talk about knowing yourself, and this is the kind of the doing of knowing, if that makes sense, yourself. So let's work with lots of C's. So first of all, how do you tell your story? And this is how you tell it in media. This is how you tell it in an interview. There are 3 things that I want you to think of. The 3 C's are coherent, credible, and compelling. These are the 3 C's of telling your story. By coherent, what I mean is, Does your story make sense to the person who may hire you? Does your resume tell a story? Is your talk consistent with your resume? Credible, meaning, is it authentically you? Do I believe what you have to tell me? Do I believe that you're going to be a good employee? Do I believe that you have the skills that represent yourself? That is credible. So for example, if I look you up on LinkedIn, is your LinkedIn profile up to date, or does it contradict your resume? And then the third C is compelling. And really what that means is, how does your story move the person who's going to hire, who has the authority to hire you, or who you're talking to in terms of returning to work? Are they compelled by your story? And I don't mean that you're spilling your whole cancer story. What I mean is that, are you a person that they find coherent, credible, and compelling to add to their team? When we talk about the three, so this is one that I've added. So this is the three C's of composing your story. So when you tell a story, for example, if you're in an interview, how I would like you to compose your story and how people are conditioned to hear stories is this: context, content, and culmination. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to tell me a story, for example, about a time you were successful at work, give me the context. Don't give me the whole story. Tell me, when I was working at this little label company that had 10 employees. That's all I need for context. This was my job there. And then content, make sure that there actually is a story there. So I'm going to tell a particular story of a time when, for example, when I was working at the label company, we had to ramp up for a national campaign in 6 weeks. That's content, that is a story. And culmination, meaning, how did the story end? What was your accomplishment through the story? And so that particular story ends by me saying that I was able to hire 2 customer service reps and more than a dozen printers to expand the company to 6 times its size within 6 weeks. And that is sort of my while managing the customer service function. So that's my culmination. So what actually happened in the story? And then the other 3 C's that I want to share with you is thinking about the post-COVID, post-cancer journey. And those are courage, caution, and compassion. And so, again, when all else fails, self-compassion is something that is always there. You won't hit the mark every time. You won't always get what you ask for. You might not even get what you want. Having the courage to ask, showing up, being as cautious as you need to, given your own situation, and approaching all of these things with compassion. These are the 3 C's of post-COVID, post-cancer journey that I'd really like you to remember. When you consider gaps in disclosure, remember that your story is your story. Remember, you are in charge of how you create that story. There's very little in terms of absolutes that you need to adhere to when it comes to disclosure. And I'll just tell you what they are is, if you're in conversations with an employer's insurance company, of course, you have to disclose your journey, and if there are any safety issues to to others or yourself in the office. So if, for example, you're returning to work with leg braces, you may need to inform somebody, not that they won't be able to see them, but you may need to inform, make sure that that's connected to a safety plan for the office. I'm trying to monitor the chat. Oh, the third C. Oh goodness. Okay, so let me just retell the 3 C's. There's several of them. So the 3 C's are of telling your story are coherent, credible, and compelling. The 3 C's of composing your story are context, content, and culmination. And the 3 C's of post-COVID, post-cancer are courage, caution, and compassion. And then considering gaps in disclosure. And again, I'll just read the quote on this page. Give yourself a chance to discover who you really are. And that's Tina Panosian. Back to the doing, let's talk about developing the right resources. So the first thing I'm going to tell you about resume writing is if you ask 100 people about your resume, I promise you, you'll get 150 expert answers. And there's good reason for that. So first of all, your resume really needs to take into account how you're using it. So if you're only just applying through jobs through, for example, Indeed, that's one kind of a resume that you want. And I don't, by the way, recommend just doing that one strategy. You may need an electronic version of your resume. So most of us will have it in a version of Word, but probably an electronic version would better be a PDF version so that your formatting shows up the same all the time. You should have a hard copy version. So if you're going for an in-person interview or meeting, then you should bring a resume with you, a hard copy. And I'll tell you what, even if you're going back to an internal position, many times, it's been many years since you've had an updated resume on file. I can tell you that at one time I was returning to my company from mat leave, actually, and I was given my job had been eliminated, and I was given an opportunity to apply for a couple of different jobs, and I brought in my resume and I treated it, even though I was already employed by the company, I treated it like an actual interview. And that was one of the reasons that the manager gave me the job, because he said, you didn't assume that because you already worked for the company, you had the job. And most of the people that he had talked to had come in assuming they had the job. So there is a question here in the chat box. I'm going to leave those questions till the end, and then we'll come back to them. So let me get through. I talked a little bit about social media and personal brand at a minimum. Hopefully everyone's Google searched themselves, know what you look like on the web. A couple of interesting ways to go about looking for work is this thing called information interviews and networking. And again, LinkedIn is an amazing platform for that. Although there are many, and sometimes it's specific to your particular vocation. There's online job boards, there's specific job boards. So very often your company, if it's a large company, will have an internal job board. You may want to check in with your, wherever you went to university, any alumni associations and supports. There are job fairs. There are community agencies like Wellspring but they're not just for cancer survivors, but they do provide government-funded free services to the general public. So those are somewhere to go. I want to talk about developing the right package. So there's a simple way. This is the quote from Malcolm Gladwell, who's a futurist. There is a simple way to package information that under the right circumstances can make it irresistible. And all you have to do is find it. So, let me go to interviewing. I think I'm going to stay on that slide for another moment. I want to talk about the interview itself. What I suggest to my career coaching clients is you write a bank of stories. So remember that we were talking earlier about coherent, credible, and compelling. I want you to write a bunch of stories that you can use in various situations. And again, even if you're going back to the same job, you want to be able to talk about your wins and your losses. So prepare a bunch of stories about your wins and losses that you can use where it comes to interview questions. It's almost a certainty if you're interviewing from outside, you're going to be asked in one form or another about your weaknesses, or some times you were not successful. You'll be asked to demonstrate your strengths through stories. So I would recommend you have a bank of stories. I would recommend, again, if you're coming from the outside, know the company. If you're coming internally, make sure you know the department, what they do, how they relate to what you know. Prepare a list of credible questions. So by time you get to the end of your meeting, whether it is internally or externally returning to work, you want to have intelligent questions. When somebody says, do you have any more questions? And you say, no, I'm good. People assume that you are not interested in the conversation, that you had no further curiosities. Sometimes can be an indication that you are not interested. So during the interview or your return to work conversation, confidence is key. Again, coherent, credible, and compelling. That's the way you want to present in the interview. I want to talk about managing the process and expectations, and I know we'll have some time, additional time for questions as well. So I wish it were not true, but it is true. Ghosting is not personal. I can give you two very recent examples of people who were told they had an offer forthcoming and then completely ghosted by the company. That's externally. You have to remember, especially if there's two potential scenarios. One, you're dealing with human resources and they've passed along who they want to pass along, but they don't necessarily want to inform what they call the rejections before all the people have made it through the process. So that might be why you're elongated. They may forget. It may not be company practice to inform people. If you were interviewing with a hiring manager, the hiring manager it's not their first priority to hire. Their first priority is probably their job and managing the people that exist. So know that it's not personal. Consider yourself and your health and your well-being and your mental health and your self-compassion during this journey. And know that this is you taking charge of your career. Martin Luther King Jr. says, everything that is done in the world is done by hope. And I would add a little self-compassion. And so I'm going